All right, let's talk about something really important. If you're a Christian and you're struggling with anxiety or depression or trauma, I'm willing to bet you've heard some version of this advice. Just pray about it. And the implication there, of course, is that if your faith was strong enough, you wouldn't need a therapist. And that creates this really painful dilemma. You're left staring at this question, which feels like a totally impossible choice. It feels like you have to pick between your faith and your mental health, like they're somehow at war with each other. It almost forces you to believe that seeking professional help is a sign that you failed spiritually. And that little phrase, just pray about it, even when it's well-intentioned, can just land with such a heavy thud. It adds this whole other layer of spiritual pressure and guilt right on top of what you're already going through. But what if I told you that this entire way of thinking is wrong? That therapy isn't a replacement for faith, but actually a powerful tool God can use to bring healing? Let's break down that false choice together. So let's get right to the heart of this. This feeling of being forced to choose isn't just painful, it's actually based on a huge misunderstanding of how God often works in our lives and in the world. This is the false choice we get presented with: prayer versus therapy, as if you can only pick one. It's this idea that your spiritual life and your psychological health are in some kind of cage match, and only one can come out on top. And that just leads so many of us to believe that admitting we need help is the same as admitting our faith isn't strong enough. And here's where it really comes from. The root of this whole conflict is often a really narrow belief that any healing from God has to be instantaneous and totally supernatural. You know, we read stories in the Bible, and we assume that if we just pray hard enough, a chemical imbalance or a trauma response or these unhealthy thought patterns should just, poof, vanish into thin air. But that expectation, it places a massive and frankly an unbiblical weight on people's shoulders. This misunderstanding has real damaging consequences, not just for our minds, but for our spirits too. And this is what creates a horrible, vicious cycle. When that instant miracle doesn't happen, we don't question the expectation, we question ourselves. We get stuck in this awful loop of self-blame, thinking, what is wrong with me? Why isn't my faith enough to fix this? And I want to be perfectly clear about this. That is a dangerous burden. It's a weight you are never, ever meant to carry. And it's just not supported by what the Bible actually teaches when you look at the whole picture. Scripture actually shows us a much bigger, broader way that God brings healing and restoration. So how do we fix this? How do we resolve this conflict? Well, it all comes down to this beautiful theological idea called common grace. And honestly, this is the key that unlocks a much healthier and a much more biblical approach to mental health. So what in the world is common grace? Well, to put it simply, it's the idea that God works through people, through their skills, their wisdom, their knowledge, to bring goodness and healing into the world for everyone. Not just for believers, for everyone. It's God's grace that is common to all of humanity. I mean, think about it like this. If you break your leg, you're going to pray, for sure. But you're also going to go to a doctor who has God-given skill and knowledge about the human body. If you need to build a house, you hire builders and architects. So why on earth would we treat the most complex, intricate part of our entire being, our minds, any differently? In fact, the Bible itself totally affirms this. Proverbs tells us that there is safety in an abundance of counselors. A trained professional therapist? That's exactly what that is, a counselor, someone who has dedicated their life to understanding the human mind and providing real tools for change. That is God's common grace in action. And this idea also helps us remember that we are incredibly complex beings. Our struggles are rarely just spiritual. So we need a model that treats us like whole people, with all these interconnected parts that need care. This is often called the biopsychosocial spiritual model, and it just recognizes that you're made up of these four distinct but deeply intertwined parts. Your overall well-being really depends on the health of all of them working together, and this is exactly where therapy can be such an incredible asset. So let's break that down. From a biological standpoint, sometimes there really is a chemical imbalance, and medication developed through God-given science can be a true gift. Psychologically, therapy gives us practical tools, like cognitive behavioral therapy, to literally help rewire the unhealthy thought patterns that keep us stuck. And then socially, it helps us navigate the difficult relationships and the tough environments that have a huge impact on our mental health. So you see, it's not a competition between your faith and these other areas. It's a collaboration. When you use therapy to take care of the biological, the psychological, and the social parts of your struggle, you actually free up your spirit to connect more deeply and more fully with God. So, the most important takeaway here is that we have to completely reframe how we look at the decision to get professional help. It is absolutely not an admission of spiritual weakness. The answer to that question we started with, God or therapy, is a loud, resounding God and therapy. They're not enemies, they are partners in the journey toward healing and wholeness. So please remember this: seeking professional help is not a lack of faith. It is an act of wisdom, and it is fully aligned with biblical principles. And maybe most importantly, it's an act of good stewardship. It's taking care of the complex, beautiful mind that God gave you. And I just want to leave you with this one final thought. For so long, we've been taught to see therapy as some kind of failure of faith. But what if that's completely backward? What if trusting God enough to let Him work through the wisdom and the skill of a trained counselor is your next and your bravest act of faith?